David, a retired history professor, had always prided himself on his disciplined and structured life. He believed that maintaining order was the key to success, both in his career and personal life. However, on this particular evening, as he sat in his dimly lit study surrounded by books and old photographs, he heard something unusual, laughter coming from the attic. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. At first, he tried to ignore it, focusing on the papers he was grading out of habit. But the joyful sounds persisted, piquing his curiosity and stirring something long forgotten within him. With a mixture of annoyance and intrigue, David decided to investigate. As he climbed the creaky stairs to the attic, David's mind wandered to his childhood. He remembered how he used to be before life's responsibilities had molded him into the stern, often unyielding man he had become. The laughter grew louder, and he found himself drawn to it, almost against his will. Reaching the attic door, David hesitated for a moment. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever mischief he might find, and pushed it open. The sight that greeted him was far from what he expected. His niece Lucy and nephew Max were huddled around an old telescope, their eyes wide with wonder as they took turns peering through the eyepiece. The room was bathed in soft moonlight, streaming through the small window, illuminating their excited faces. "Uncle David," Max exclaimed, noticing him first. "Come look at the moon. It's so big and bright tonight." Lucy chimed in. "We found this old telescope in the corner. It's amazing." David stood frozen in the doorway, torn between his instinct to reprimand them for being in the attic without permission and a growing sense of curiosity. The children's enthusiasm was infectious, and he found himself taking a step forward. "Let me see that telescope," he said, his voice softer than he intended. As he approached, he recognized the instrument. It had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had sparked David's own interest in history and science many years ago. Carefully, David adjusted the telescope, his hands remembering the motions from long ago. He leaned in to look, and suddenly, the years melted away. The moon filled his vision, its craters and seas crystal clear, just as they had been when he was a boy. A flood of memories washed over him, nights spent with his grandfather, learning about the stars and planets, dreaming of exploration and discovery. David felt a lump form in his throat as he realized how far he had strayed from those dreams. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Lucy's voice broke through his reverie. David turned to look at his niece and nephew, seeing the same wonder in their eyes that he once had. In that moment, he felt a connection to them that he had never experienced before. "Yes, it is," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Would you like me to show you how to use this properly?" The children nodded eagerly, and David found himself settling in beside them, explaining the parts of the telescope and how to focus it. As he talked, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling of joy and purpose that he hadn't experienced in years. For the next hour, the three of them took turns observing the moon and the few visible planets. David shared stories about constellations and space exploration, surprised at how much he remembered and how good it felt to pass on this knowledge. As the night wore on, David realized that this simple act of stargazing had awakened something in him. The rigid boundaries he had set for himself seemed to soften, and he found himself laughing and joking with Lucy and Max in a way he never had before. When it was finally time for bed, the children hugged him tightly, thanking him for the impromptu astronomy lesson. As they left the attic, David lingered, running his hand over the telescope's worn surface. He felt as if he had rediscovered a part of himself that had been lost for far too long. That night, as David lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the unexpected turn his evening had taken. He realized that in trying to maintain control over his life, he had shut out the joy and wonder that had once driven him. The laughter of his niece and nephew, the thrill of rediscovery, had cracked open a door he thought long closed. As he drifted off to sleep, David made a silent promise to himself to nurture this rekindled spark, to reconnect with the passions of his youth, and to build a stronger bond with Lucy and Max. Little did he know that this night was just the beginning of a journey that would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The following evening, David found himself drawn back to the attic, this time with a sense of anticipation rather than skepticism. Lucy and Max were already there, eager to continue their celestial exploration. As they settled in for another night of stargazing, David felt compelled to share more about their family history. "Did I ever tell you about your great-grandfather?" David began, adjusting the telescope. "He was the one who bought this telescope, you know. He dreamed of being an astronomer." Lucy and Max shook their heads, their eyes wide with curiosity. David continued, his voice taking on a wistful tone. "He worked as a clockmaker, but his real passion was the stars. Every clear night, he'd be up here, charting the sky and dreaming of discoveries." As David spoke, he realized how much of himself he saw in his grandfather's story. He too had harbored dreams beyond his chosen profession, dreams he had pushed aside in favor of practicality and expectations. Max, always inquisitive, piped up, "Uncle David, what about you? Did you want to be an astronomer too?" The question caught David off guard. He paused, looking out the attic window at the star-studded sky. I wanted to be many things, Max. An explorer, a scientist, maybe even an astronaut. But life has a way of steering you down different paths." Lucy, perceptive beyond her years, noticed the hint of regret in her uncle's voice. "It's not too late, is it, to explore or do science stuff?" David chuckled softly, touched by her optimism. "No, I suppose it's never too late, but it's not always easy to change course." As they continued their observations, David found himself opening up more about his own aspirations and the choices that had led him to become a history professor. He spoke of his love for uncovering the past, but also of the curiosity about the future that he had never fully abandoned. The children listened intently, asking questions and sharing their own dreams. Max wanted to build robots, while Lucy aspired to be a writer. Their enthusiasm was contagious, and David found himself wondering why he had ever stopped dreaming so boldly. As the night wore on, Lucy suddenly sat up straight, her eyes bright with an idea. "Uncle David, we have a project coming up at school about space exploration. Could you help us with it? You know so much." David hesitated for a moment, old habits of maintaining distance warring with his newfound desire to connect. But the eager faces of his niece and nephew broke through his reservations. "I'd be happy to help," he said, surprised by how much he meant it. The prospect of diving into a project about space exploration ignited a spark in David that he thought had long been extinguished. As they began to brainstorm ideas, he felt his passion for science resurging, intertwining with his expertise in history. Over the next few days, David found himself fully immersed in helping Lucy and Max with their project. He dug out old books on space exploration, regaling the children with tales of the space race and the moon landing. He even reached out to old colleagues in the scientific community for up-to-date information on current space missions. As they worked, David noticed a change in himself. The rigid, often distant uncle was giving way to a more engaged, enthusiastic mentor. He found joy in explaining complex concepts in ways the children could understand, and pride in seeing their eyes light up with comprehension. One afternoon, as they pored over diagrams of the solar system, Max looked up at David with admiration. "Uncle David, you're so smart about all this stuff. Why didn't you become a science teacher instead of a history teacher?" The question stirred something deep within David. He realized that somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of his own passions in pursuit of what he thought was expected of him. "Sometimes, Max," he said slowly, We make choices based on what we think is best at the time, but it's never too late to explore new interests. As the project progressed, David found himself reconnecting not just with his love for science, but with a part of himself he had long neglected. The curiosity, the wonder, the desire to understand the universe, all of it came flooding back, reinvigorating him in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Lucy and Max's enthusiasm was infectious, and David found himself looking forward to their study sessions with an excitement he hadn't felt in his own work for a long time. He began to see the project not just as a school assignment, but as an opportunity to pass on a legacy of curiosity and exploration that his grandfather had instilled in him. As they worked late into the evening, surrounded by books, charts, and the soft glow of the computer screen, David realized that this project was becoming more than just helping his niece and nephew. It was a journey of rediscovery for himself, a chance to blend his love of history with his passion for science, and an opportunity to forge a deeper connection with the younger generation of his family. Little did David know that this project was just the beginning of a transformative journey that would challenge his perceptions, reignite old dreams, and open up new possibilities he had never imagined. As the project with Lucy and Max progressed, David found himself increasingly invested in their shared exploration of space and science. One evening, as they were wrapping up another session, an idea struck him. "What if we organized a stargazing night for the whole family?" David suggested, surprising himself with his enthusiasm. "We could set up the telescope in the backyard, invite everyone over, and make it a real event." Lucy and Max's eyes lit up with excitement. "That would be awesome," Max exclaimed. "We could show everyone what we've learned." The three of them began planning immediately, their energy palpable. David found himself caught up in the children's excitement, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. They decided on a date, made lists of what they'd need, and started drafting invitations to send to the family. As they worked, David couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just a few short weeks. The stern, distant uncle he had been was giving way to someone more engaged, more alive. He was rediscovering parts of himself he thought were long lost. The next day, while Lucy and Max were at school, David decided to clear out some space in the attic for their ongoing project. As he moved boxes and old furniture, he came across a dusty trunk he hadn't seen in years. Curiosity piqued, he opened it. Inside, among old photographs and keepsakes, he found a leather-bound journal. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized his grandfather's handwriting on the cover. With trembling hands, he opened it. The journal was filled with astronomical observations, sketches of constellations, and personal reflections. As David read, he felt as if he was connecting with his grandfather across time. The pages were filled with the same wonder and curiosity that David had been rediscovering with Lucy and Max. One entry in particular caught his eye. "I may never become the astronomer I dreamed of being, but I hope that my passion for the stars will live on through my family. Perhaps one day, one of my descendants will look up at the night sky and feel the same wonder I do." David's eyes welled with tears. He realized that in helping Lucy and Max with their project, he was fulfilling his grandfather's wish in a way he never expected. That evening, when the children arrived for their usual session, David shared his discovery with them. He read excerpts from the journal, watching as Lucy and Max listened with rapt attention. "Your great-great-grandfather wrote this," David explained, his voice thick with emotion. "He loved the stars just as much as we do." Lucy reached out and touched the journal reverently. "It's like we're continuing his work," she said softly. Max nodded enthusiastically. "Can we include some of his observations in our project? It would be like he's part of our team." David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Let's see what we can use." As they pored over the journal together, David felt a profound sense of connection to his grandfather, to Lucy and Max, and to the legacy of curiosity and wonder that had been passed down through generations. The journal became a centerpiece of their project, adding a personal touch to their scientific exploration. David found himself sharing stories about his grandfather that he had almost forgotten, bringing the past to life for Lucy and Max. As they worked, the conversation turned to dreams and aspirations. Max spoke of his desire to build robots that could explore other planets. Lucy shared her hope of writing stories that would inspire people to look up at the stars. David listened, realizing how much he had missed by not engaging with his family like this before. He found himself opening up about his own unfulfilled dreams, the astronomy courses he had wanted to take in college, the space program he had once considered joining. "Why didn't you do those things, Uncle David?" Lucy asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. David paused, considering his answer carefully. "I suppose I got caught up in what I thought I should do, rather than what I wanted to do. I chose the safe path." Max looked thoughtful. "But you're helping us now. Isn't that kind of like following your dream?" David was struck by the simple wisdom in Max's words. He realized that in helping his niece and nephew, he was indeed reconnecting with his passion for science and exploration. It might not be the path he had originally envisioned, but it was no less meaningful. As the night wore on and they continued to plan their family stargazing event, David felt a sense of excitement building. He was no longer just helping with a school project. He was embarking on a journey of rediscovery, guided by the curiosity of youth and the wisdom of the past. The stars, it seemed, had aligned to offer David a second chance at pursuing his passions. As he looked at Lucy and Max, eagerly discussing their plans, he made a silent promise to himself and to the memory of his grandfather. He would nurture this rekindled love for science and exploration, not just for himself, but for the generations to come. Little did David know that this journey was far from over. The stargazing night they were planning would be just the beginning of a series of events that would challenge him, inspire him, and ultimately lead him to a revelation that would change the course of his life. The night of the family stargazing event arrived, bringing with it a sense of anticipation and excitement. David, Lucy, and Max had spent weeks preparing, and now the backyard was transformed into an amateur astronomer's paradise. The old telescope stood proudly on the lawn, surrounded by star charts, blankets, and a table laden with snacks. As family members began to arrive, David felt a mix of nervousness and exhilaration. This was more than just a gathering. It was a chance to share his rekindled passion with those closest to him. He watched as Lucy and Max eagerly greeted their cousins, aunts, and uncles, their enthusiasm infectious. Once everyone had settled in, David cleared his throat and began the evening's proceedings. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "Tonight, we're going to explore the night sky and learn about the constellations that have fascinated humanity for millennia." As he spoke, David felt a familiar warmth spread through him, the same feeling he used to get when teaching a particularly engaging history lesson. But this was different, more personal. He wasn't just reciting facts. He was sharing a part of himself and his family's legacy. David started with the easiest constellations to spot: the Big Dipper, Orion, Cassiopeia. For each one, he shared not just the scientific facts, but also the myths and stories his grandfather had taught him. He watched as the eyes of both children and adults widened with wonder. "Did you know," he said, pointing to a bright star, "that light has been traveling for years just to reach our eyes tonight? When you look at a star, you're looking into the past." This statement sparked a flurry of questions and comments from the gathered family members. David found himself engaged in discussions about time, space, and the nature of the universe, topics he hadn't explored in depth since his younger days. As the night progressed, family members took turns at the telescope, exclaiming in awe at the craters of the moon and the rings of Saturn. David moved among them, offering explanations and encouragement, feeling more alive than he had in years. During a lull in the observations, David's sister approached him. "I haven't seen you this animated in years, David," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "It's like you've found your spark again." David smiled, realizing the truth in her words. "I suppose I have," he replied. "Thanks to Lucy and Max, I've rediscovered a part of myself I thought was long gone." As the night wore on, the younger cousins began sharing their own dreams and aspirations. One wanted to be an astronaut, another a geologist studying rocks on Mars. David listened, offering encouragement and sharing relevant historical anecdotes. He realized how much he had missed this kind of interaction, the exchange of ideas and dreams across generations. Towards the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin, David found himself standing alone by the telescope. He looked up at the star-strewn sky, feeling a profound sense of connection to the universe, to his family, and to his own long-buried dreams. In that moment, David made a decision. He would no longer let his passions lie dormant. Whether through teaching, writing, or simply sharing his knowledge with his family, he would find a way to keep this flame of curiosity and wonder alive. As he began to pack up the equipment, Lucy and Max approached him, their eyes shining with excitement. "Uncle David," Lucy said, "can we do this again? Everyone loved it." David smiled, feeling a surge of affection for his niece and nephew. "Of course we can," he replied. "In fact, I think this might be the start of a new family tradition." As they worked together to clear the yard, David's mind was already racing with ideas for future events and projects. He realized that this night had been more than just a stargazing session. It had been the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Later that night, as David lay in bed reflecting on the evening's events, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. He had rediscovered not just his love for science and astronomy, but also the joy of sharing knowledge and inspiring others. He thought about the proud smile on his sister's face, the wonder in the eyes of his nieces and nephews, and the engaging discussions he'd had with family members of all ages. For the first time in a long while, David felt truly connected to his family and to his own passions. As he drifted off to sleep, David's mind was filled with possibilities. He had taken the first step on a new journey, one that promised to bring him closer to his family, his dreams, and the wonders of the universe. Little did he know that this was just the beginning, and that the greatest revelations were yet to come. The days following the stargazing event were filled with a renewed sense of purpose for David. The success of the night had ignited something within him, a desire to continue exploring and sharing his passion for science and history. It was during this time that Lucy and Max approached him with an unexpected request. "Uncle David," Lucy began, her voice tinged with excitement, "we were wondering if you could help us with our school project. We want to do something really special after the stargazing night." Max nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, we want to combine what we learned about space with our family history. Can you help us?" David felt a surge of warmth at their request. "Of course," he replied, surprised by his own eagerness. "What did you have in mind?" As the children explained their ideas, David found himself becoming increasingly invested. They wanted to create a presentation that would not only showcase what they had learned about astronomy, but also incorporate the story of their great-great-grandfather's passion for the stars. Over the next few weeks, David's study transformed into a hub of creativity and learning. Maps of constellations shared space with family photographs, while timelines of space exploration intertwined with their family tree. David found himself delving into old family records, unearthing stories and anecdotes that brought their history to life. As they worked, David realized that this project was more than just a school assignment. It was becoming a journey of self-discovery, not just for Lucy and Max, but for himself as well. He was rediscovering the joy of teaching, the thrill of research, and the satisfaction of connecting disparate pieces of information into a cohesive narrative. One afternoon, as they were poring over old family letters, Lucy looked up at David with curiosity in her eyes. "Uncle David," she asked, "do you ever wish you had become a scientist instead of a history teacher?" The question caught David off guard. He paused, considering his answer carefully. "You know," he said slowly, "I used to think those two things were separate. But working on this project with you, I'm realizing that history and science are more connected than I ever imagined. The story of our family's interest in the stars is also the story of human curiosity and exploration." Max nodded thoughtfully. "So you get to be both a historian and a scientist." David chuckled, touched by his nephew's perspective. "I suppose you're right, Max. And helping you with this project has made me realize how much I've missed teaching and sharing knowledge." As the project progressed, David found himself reaching out to old colleagues, both in the history department and in the sciences. He was surprised by how easily he fell back into academic discussions and how much he enjoyed synthesizing information from different fields to help Lucy and Max create their presentation. The children's enthusiasm was infectious, and David found himself looking forward to their work sessions with an excitement he hadn't felt in years. He began to see the project not just as a school assignment, but as an opportunity to pass on a legacy of curiosity and exploration that had been passed down through generations of his family. One evening, as they were putting the finishing touches on their presentation, David had an epiphany. "You know," he said, looking at Lucy and Max with a smile, "I think this project could be the start of something bigger." The children looked at him curiously. "What do you mean, Uncle David?" Lucy asked. "Well," David replied, his mind racing with possibilities. "What if we turned this into a regular thing? We could start a family science club, or maybe even reach out to the community. We could organize more stargazing nights, or give presentations at the local library." Max's eyes lit up. "That would be awesome. We could teach other kids about space and history." As they discussed the idea, David felt a sense of excitement building. He realized that this project had not only brought him closer to Lucy and Max, but had also reignited his passion for teaching and sharing knowledge. It was as if he had found a way to combine all the different aspects of his interests and experiences into something meaningful and fulfilling. That night, after Lucy and Max had gone home, David sat in his study, surrounded by the fruits of their labor. He looked at the family photographs, the star charts, and the timelines they had created, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He realized that in helping his niece and nephew with their project, he had stumbled upon a new purpose for himself. As he began to jot down ideas for future projects and events, David felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. He was no longer just a retired history professor. He was becoming a bridge between generations, a keeper of family lore, and a guide to the wonders of science and history. Little did David know that this was just the beginning. The presentation they were preparing would lead to unexpected opportunities and challenges, pushing him further along this new path he had discovered. The journey of rediscovery that had begun with a simple night of stargazing was about to take him places he never imagined. The day of Lucy and Max's school presentation arrived, bringing with it a mixture of excitement and nervousness. David, who had agreed to attend and support the children, found himself more anxious than he expected. It had been years since he'd been in a classroom setting, and the prospect of facing a room full of students and parents stirred up emotions he thought he'd left behind. As they entered the school auditorium, David was struck by the bustle of activity. Parents chatted animatedly while children made last-minute adjustments to their projects. Lucy and Max, however, seemed calm and prepared, their confidence a testament to the work they'd put in over the past weeks. "Are you ready?" David asked, trying to keep his own nervousness out of his voice. Lucy nodded enthusiastically. "We've got this, Uncle David. Thanks to you." As they set up their presentation, David couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The display they had created was a perfect blend of scientific information and family history. Star charts and timelines of space exploration stood alongside family photographs and excerpts from his grandfather's journal. It was a visual representation of the journey they'd all taken together. When it was their turn to present, Lucy and Max took center stage with a confidence that surprised David. They began by introducing their great-great-grandfather's passion for astronomy, seamlessly weaving it into a broader narrative about the human quest to understand the cosmos. As the children spoke, David noticed the rapt attention of the audience. Parents leaned forward in their seats, clearly engaged by the unique approach to the topic. Even the teacher, whom David had pegged as a stern type, nodded approvingly. Halfway through the presentation, Max turned to David. "And now, our Uncle David will tell us more about how our family's interest in astronomy connects to the broader history of space exploration." For a moment, David froze. He hadn't expected to be part of the presentation, but as he looked at the eager faces of Lucy and Max, he felt a familiar sensation wash over him, the thrill of sharing knowledge, of connecting with an audience. Taking a deep breath, David stepped forward. He began to speak, his voice growing stronger with each word. He talked about the space race, about how ordinary people like his grandfather had been inspired by humanity's reach for the stars. He drew connections between personal passion and scientific progress, weaving a narrative that captivated the room. As he spoke, David felt a spark reignite within him. This was why he had become a teacher in the first place: to inspire, to enlighten, to share the wonder of discovery. He realized how much he had missed this feeling. When the presentation ended, the applause was enthusiastic. Parents and students alike approached them, asking questions and expressing their appreciation for the unique perspective they had offered. One parent, who introduced himself as a local scientist, was particularly impressed. "I've never seen history and science integrated so seamlessly," he said. "Have you considered doing more presentations like this? Our community could really benefit from this kind of interdisciplinary approach." Before David could respond, the school principal joined the conversation. "I couldn't agree more," she said, smiling warmly at David. "Mr. Harrison, your expertise and passion are evident. We've been looking for someone to lead some enrichment programs. Would you be interested in discussing some possibilities?" David was taken aback by the offer. He glanced at Lucy and Max, who were beaming with pride, and felt a surge of emotion. This presentation, which he had seen as a simple school project, was opening doors he never expected. As they left the school that evening, David's mind was buzzing with possibilities. The principal's offer, the scientist's encouragement, and most importantly, the realization of how much he had enjoyed being back in an educational setting, it all pointed to a new chapter in his life. Later that night, as David sat in his study reflecting on the day's events, his phone buzzed with notifications. Former students and colleagues, having heard about his involvement in the presentation through the grapevine of social media, were reaching out. Messages of congratulations mixed with reminiscences of his teaching days and inquiries about his future plans. One message in particular caught his eye. It was from a former student who had gone on to become an astrophysicist. "Professor Harrison," it read, "your passion for history always inspired me to look at science through a broader lens. Hearing about your presentation today reminded me of how much your approach influenced my career. Any chance you're considering a comeback to education?" As David read through the messages, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest. He realized that his impact as an educator had reached further than he ever imagined. The years he had spent feeling unfulfilled suddenly seemed to take on new meaning. Picking up a notepad, David began to jot down ideas: enrichment programs, community lectures, interdisciplinary workshops. The possibilities seemed endless. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose and direction. As he wrote, David glanced at the family photographs on his desk. He saw his grandfather's kind eyes looking back at him and felt a deep sense of connection. In helping Lucy and Max with their project, he hadn't just reconnected with his own passions. He had found a way to honor his family's legacy while forging a new path forward. With a smile, David realized that this presentation wasn't an end, but a beginning. The journey that had started with a simple night of stargazing was leading him towards a future filled with new challenges, new opportunities, and a chance to make a difference in ways he had never imagined. In the weeks following the school presentation, David found himself caught up in a whirlwind of activity. The principal's offer to lead enrichment programs had blossomed into a part-time position at the school, where David began conducting workshops that bridged the gap between history and science. His unique approach, combining historical context with scientific concepts, quickly gained popularity among students and teachers alike. As David immersed himself in this new role, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The enthusiasm of the students reminded him of why he had fallen in love with teaching in the first place. He found himself spending evenings researching new topics, crafting engaging lessons, and even reaching out to old colleagues for collaborative ideas. Lucy and Max became regular fixtures in David's study, often joining him as he prepared for his classes. Their curiosity and fresh perspectives continually inspired him, pushing him to find new ways to make complex concepts accessible and exciting. One afternoon, as David was sorting through some old family documents for a lesson on the history of astronomy, he came across a dusty, sealed envelope. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized his grandfather's handwriting. It was addressed simply, "To be opened by a dreamer." With trembling hands, David carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age but still clearly legible. As he began to read, he felt as if his grandfather's voice was speaking directly to him across the decades. "My dear descendant, if you're reading this, it means you've inherited not just my old telescope, but also my passion for the stars. I hope you found joy in gazing at the night sky, in pondering the vastness of the universe, and in asking the big questions that have driven humanity's quest for knowledge. I never became the astronomer I dreamed of being. Life had other plans for me. But I never stopped dreaming, never stopped learning, and never stopped sharing my love for the cosmos with those around me. Remember, it's never too late to follow your passion. The universe is vast, and there's always more to discover about the world around us and about ourselves. Don't let fear or expectations hold you back. Reach for the stars, both literally and figuratively. And most importantly, pass on this love of learning to the next generation. Our family's legacy isn't just in our blood, it's in our curiosity, our wonder, and our desire to understand the world around us. Keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep dreaming. With all my love and the wisdom of the stars, your grandfather." As David finished reading, he felt tears welling up in his eyes. The letter seemed to speak directly to his current situation, to the journey of rediscovery he had been on since that first night in the attic with Lucy and Max. Wiping his eyes, David called out to his niece and nephew, who were working on their homework in the next room. As they gathered around, he read the letter aloud, his voice thick with emotion. When he finished, there was a moment of awed silence. Then Max spoke up, his voice filled with wonder. "It's like he knew, Uncle David, like he knew you'd find your way back to the stars." Lucy nodded in agreement. "And now you're helping us, and all those kids at school, to love science and history too. You're doing exactly what he wanted." David looked at the earnest faces of his niece and nephew, then back at the letter in his hands. He realized that in helping them with their school project, in rediscovering his passion for teaching, he had been fulfilling his grandfather's wishes without even knowing it. The letter sparked a new fire in David. He began to see his recent endeavors not just as a pleasant diversion, but as a calling, a way to honor his grandfather's legacy and to make a real difference in the lives of young people. That evening, energized by his grandfather's words, David sat down at his computer and began to type. Ideas that had been percolating in his mind for weeks now flowed freely. Plans for a community science program, proposals for interdisciplinary workshops, even the outline of a book that would weave together his family's history with the broader story of scientific discovery. As he worked late into the night, David felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had experienced in years. He realized that he wasn't just reimagining his retirement. He was embarking on a whole new career, one that combined all the passions and experiences of his life. Little did David know that this letter, this unexpected message from the past, was about to propel him towards a future he had never imagined. His part-time position at the school expanded, and he found himself developing a comprehensive curriculum that blended history, science, and personal growth. The positive feedback from students, parents, and colleagues only fueled his enthusiasm further. However, as David's involvement in education grew, so did the challenges he faced. The school board, while appreciative of his efforts, expressed concerns about the unconventional nature of his programs. Some traditionalist members argued that his interdisciplinary approach didn't align with standardized testing requirements. One particularly tense meeting left David feeling discouraged. As he drove home, doubts began to creep in. Was he truly making a difference, or was he simply indulging in a midlife crisis? The weight of expectations, both his own and others, began to feel overwhelming. Arriving home, David found Lucy and Max waiting for him, eager to hear about his day. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and as he shared the challenges he was facing, he found himself drawing strength from their unwavering support. "But Uncle David," Lucy said, her brow furrowed in confusion, "isn't learning supposed to be about more than just tests? You're teaching us how everything connects." Max nodded vigorously. "Yeah, and it's so much more interesting this way. We actually want to learn more." Their words struck a chord with David. He realized that in his excitement to implement his ideas, he had perhaps neglected to fully communicate the value of his approach to all stakeholders. He needed to find a way to bridge the gap between his vision and the practical concerns of the education system. That night, unable to sleep, David found himself back in his study, surrounded by books, family mementos, and the telescope that had started this whole journey. As he absently adjusted the telescope, pointing it out the window at the night sky, an idea began to form. What if he could demonstrate the effectiveness of his approach on a larger scale, not just within the confines of a school, but in a way that engaged the entire community? With renewed energy, David began to sketch out a plan. He envisioned a community-wide project that would combine elements of citizen science, local history, and astronomy. It would involve students, parents, and community members in a collaborative effort to study the night sky, while also exploring the town's historical connections to scientific discovery. As dawn broke, David had the outline of a proposal that excited him more than anything he had done in years. But he also knew that bringing this vision to life would be his greatest challenge yet. It would require not only educational expertise, but also community organizing skills, fundraising abilities, and a level of public engagement he had never attempted before. Moreover, David realized that pursuing this project might mean stepping away from the security of his current position. It was a risk, especially at his age, to embark on such an ambitious endeavor. As he contemplated the challenges ahead, David's eyes fell on his grandfather's letter, now framed on his desk. The words, "Don't let fear or expectations hold you back," seemed to leap off the page, strengthening his resolve. Later that day, as David shared his idea with Lucy and Max over dinner, he was met with enthusiastic support. Their excitement reminded him of why he had started down this path in the first place, to inspire a love of learning and discovery in the next generation. "This is going to be amazing, Uncle David," Max exclaimed. "Can we help? Maybe we could get our friends involved too." Lucy, always the pragmatist, added, "But what about your job at the school? Won't this be a lot of work?" David smiled, touched by their concern and enthusiasm. "It will be a lot of work," he admitted. "And I'm not sure exactly how it will all come together. But I think it's something worth pursuing. Sometimes, we have to take risks to follow our dreams." As he spoke these words, David felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He knew that the path ahead would be challenging. He would face skepticism, logistical hurdles, and moments of self-doubt. But he also knew that he had rediscovered his passion, and he owed it to himself and to the legacy of his grandfather to see where this journey might lead. That night, as David stood at the window, gazing up at the star-filled sky, he felt a sense of possibility that he hadn't experienced in decades. The universe, vast and mysterious, seemed to beckon to him, offering new horizons to explore. Little did David know that his greatest challenges and his most profound discoveries still lay ahead. The journey that had begun with a simple night of stargazing was about to take him on an adventure that would not only change his life, but would have a lasting impact on his community and beyond. As David began to put his ambitious plan into motion, he found himself navigating uncharted territory. The idea of a community-wide project that combined astronomy, history, and citizen science was met with a mix of enthusiasm and skepticism. His first step was to reach out to local organizations that might be interested in partnering with him. He started with the town's historical society, where he presented his vision of connecting the community's past with the wonders of the night sky. To his surprise and delight, the society's director, an old friend named Sarah, was immediately intrigued. "David, this is fascinating," Sarah said, leaning forward in her chair. "Did you know that our town actually has a connection to the early days of astronomy in America?" David's eyes widened. "No, I had no idea. Tell me more." Sarah explained that in the late 19th century, a local businessman had funded the construction of a small observatory on the outskirts of town. While it had been abandoned for decades, the building still stood, largely forgotten by the community. This revelation sparked an idea in David's mind. What if they could restore the old observatory as part of their project? It could serve as a physical link between the town's history and their exploration of the cosmos. Energized by this possibility, David threw himself into researching the old observatory. He spent hours in the local library, poring over old newspapers and documents. With each discovery, he felt more connected to the town's hidden astronomical heritage. One evening, as he was sharing his findings with Lucy and Max, he received an unexpected call. It was from his old colleague, the one who had invested in the school presentation idea. "David, I've been hearing rumors about this community project you're planning," the colleague said. "I think it's a brilliant idea. In fact, I might be interested in investing in it. But I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for this? It's a big undertaking, especially at this stage in your life." The question caught David off guard. He had been so caught up in the excitement of his plans that he hadn't fully considered the magnitude of what he was taking on. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he really prepared for this? Was he risking too much? As if sensing his hesitation, Lucy spoke up. "Uncle David, remember what your grandfather's letter said? About not letting fear hold you back?" Max chimed in. "Yeah, and you always tell us that the best discoveries come when you're willing to take risks." Their words bolstered David's resolve. "You're right," he said into the phone. "It is a big undertaking, but it's one I'm committed to seeing through. This project isn't just about me. It's about connecting our community to its past and inspiring the next generation of stargazers and historians." His colleague chuckled. "That's the David I remember. All right, let's set up a meeting to discuss this further. I think you might be onto something big here." As he hung up the phone, David felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He knew that securing funding was just the first of many challenges he would face, but he also felt a deep sense of purpose, a feeling that he was on the right path. Over the next few weeks, David's life became a whirlwind of activity. He met with city officials to discuss permits for the observatory restoration, reached out to local schools to gauge interest in participating, and began assembling a team of volunteers passionate about history and astronomy. Each step brought new challenges, but also unexpected allies. A local contractor offered to donate materials for the observatory restoration. A retired NASA engineer living in town volunteered to help with the technical aspects of setting up modern astronomical equipment. As word of the project spread, David was surprised to find himself becoming something of a local celebrity. People would stop him on the street to ask about the project or share their own stories of stargazing. He was even invited to give a talk at the local community center, where he shared his vision of bridging the past and the future through the lens of astronomy. One evening, as David was working late in his study, he came across an old photograph tucked away in one of his grandfather's books. It showed his grandfather standing proudly in front of what David now recognized as the old observatory. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "Dreams are built on the foundations laid by those who came before us." The discovery brought tears to David's eyes. He realized that in a way, he was fulfilling not just his own dreams, but those of his grandfather as well. This project was becoming more than just a community initiative. It was a bridge across generations, connecting the stargazers of the past with those of the future. As he pinned the photograph to his bulletin board, alongside maps of the night sky and plans for the observatory restoration, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead were daunting, but he was ready to face them. Little did he know that the greatest test of his resolve and the most unexpected revelation was yet to come. The journey that had begun with a simple night of stargazing was about to take a turn that would not only change David's life, but would have a lasting impact on his community and beyond. As David's community project gained momentum, the challenges and rewards grew in equal measure. The restoration of the old observatory had begun, with volunteers from all walks of life pitching in. Local businesses donated materials, and retired professionals offered their expertise. The project was becoming a true community effort, just as David had envisioned. However, as the observatory restoration neared completion, David faced an unexpected setback. The specialized equipment needed for modern astronomical observations was far more expensive than initially estimated. The funding they had secured was falling short, and David found himself at a crossroads. One evening, as he sat in his study contemplating their next move, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello, is this David Harrison?" a deep voice asked. "Yes, this is he," David replied, curious. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Dr. James Thornton. I'm an astronomer at the State University. I've been hearing about your community project, and I must say, I'm intrigued." David's heart raced. Could this be the break they needed? Dr. Thornton continued, "I'm part of a research team that's been looking for sites to establish a network of community observatories. Your project aligns perfectly with our goals. We'd like to discuss the possibility of partnering with you." For a moment, David was speechless. This was an opportunity beyond anything he had imagined. But as Dr. Thornton explained the details, David realized it came with a catch. The university would provide the needed equipment and ongoing support, but they would also have significant control over the observatory's operations and research focus. "This is a generous offer, Dr. Thornton," David said carefully. but I need to consider how it aligns with our community's goals. Can I get back to you in a few days?" After hanging up, David's mind was in turmoil. The university's offer would solve their financial problems and elevate the project to a level he hadn't thought possible. But would it come at the cost of the community involvement that was at the heart of his vision? The next day, David called a meeting with his core team of volunteers, including Lucy and Max. He explained the university's offer and the dilemma he faced. Opinions were divided. Some saw it as an incredible opportunity, while others worried about losing control of the project they had all worked so hard to build. As the debate continued, Max suddenly spoke up. "Uncle David, remember when we first started this? It wasn't about having the fanciest equipment. It was about bringing people together to look at the stars." Lucy nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and about connecting our town's history with its future. We don't need a super advanced observatory for that." Their words struck a chord with David. He realized that in his excitement about the university's offer, he had momentarily lost sight of the project's true purpose. That night, as David stood in the partially restored observatory, gazing up at the stars through the open dome, he had an epiphany. He picked up his phone and dialed Dr. Thornton's number. "Dr. Thornton?" David said, when the astronomer answered, "I've been thinking about your offer. While we're incredibly grateful, I don't think it's the right fit for us right now. But I have another idea. What if, instead of taking over our observatory, the university helped us establish a network of smaller community-run observatories across the state?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Dr. Thornton's voice came back, filled with excitement. "Mr. Harrison, that's brilliant. It aligns perfectly with our outreach goals, and it could create a citizen science network on a scale we've never seen before. Tell me more." Over the next hour, David and Dr. Thornton sketched out the beginnings of a plan that would revolutionize community astronomy in their state. The university would provide expertise and some equipment, but each observatory would be run by its local community, preserving the grassroots spirit that David had fostered. As dawn broke, David finally put down the phone, his mind buzzing with possibilities. He realized that what had started as a simple project to reconnect with his passion had grown into something far beyond his wildest dreams. In the weeks that followed, David's life became a whirlwind of activity. He traveled across the state, sharing his vision with other communities. The idea caught fire, and soon, a network of community observatories was in the planning stages. The original observatory in Davidstown became the pilot project and training center for this new initiative. Lucy and Max, along with their friends, became junior astronomers, learning alongside adults and contributing their own unique perspectives. One evening, as David stood surrounded by a diverse group of community members, all gazing up at the stars through their restored telescope, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had not only reconnected with his own passion, but had also kindled that same spark in others. As he looked around at the faces illuminated by starlight, young and old, from all walks of life, David realized that he had achieved something truly remarkable. He had created a legacy that would outlive him, a bridge between generations that would inspire curiosity and wonder for years to come. In that moment, David felt closer to his grandfather than ever before. He imagined him standing there, nodding in approval at the scene before them. David had taken the spark of curiosity passed down to him and had fanned it into a flame that would light the way for future generations of stargazers and dreamers. As a shooting star streaked across the sky, David made a silent wish, not for himself, but for all the young minds who would look up at the night sky with wonder and ask the big questions about their place in the universe. He knew that in helping them reach for the stars, he had found his true calling. The journey that had begun with a simple night of stargazing had led David to this moment, a moment of connection, of discovery, and of profound purpose. And as he stood there, surrounded by the community he had brought together, David knew that this was not the end of his story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities and the promise of new discoveries yet to come. The journey that had begun with a simple night of stargazing was about to take an even more exciting turn, opening up new horizons and challenges that would test his newfound sense of purpose and push him to reach for the stars in ways he never thought possible. Invigorated by his grandfather's letter and his recent successes, David threw himself wholeheartedly into his new pursuits.